Thank you for watching this Dear Systems tutorial. In this video, we'll take a look at attaching a supplier invoice to a purchase order. There are two scenarios that you may encounter for this. The first is when you receive a supplier invoice where there has been no purchase order previously made. In this case, we'll need to use the blind receipt function of a purchase order. We'll take a look at that in a moment. The second case is attaching a supplier invoice to a purchase order that you have previously generated. To do this, navigate to the purchase order that you wish to attach the invoice to. On the purchase screen, you can expand the document header to see all your supplier details. Here is also where we can see the blind receipt option that I mentioned earlier. If you were processing a supplier invoice without an initial purchase order, you'd select blind receipt when creating a new purchase. When it's selected, you'll notice that it simply removes the order stage of the workflow, skipping directly to invoice. In this case, we do have a previous purchase order, so I won't be using the blind receipt function. Once the purchase order is authorized, you can navigate to the Invoice tab and begin populating the fields. Enter the invoice number and invoice date from the supplier's invoice into the relevant fields. The due date will be populated automatically from the payment terms entered into the document header. The invoice items can either be added manually, item by item, or they can be copied directly from the purchase order by clicking Copy. The same can be done for any additional costs. These can be added one by one or copied across. You can also edit the quantity, price, discount, and tax rules at this stage if any of those were different from those on the original purchase order. Note that if you're entering a supplier's invoice after completing the receipt of goods, the invoiced items and quantities will have to match what was marked as received. Once you have entered all the details into the invoice, you can see the total cost of the purchase, including tax. In this final section, you can include payments that have been made. Payments can either be created in your accounting application and pushed to Dear Inventory, created in Dear Inventory and pushed to your accounting application, or if you have a mix of processes, sync in both ways. You can control these settings in the integration module and selecting your accounting application. To apply payments, you must first authorize the invoice. If your payment settings are set to either push to your accounting application or sync in both ways, you can add payments to the invoice. Click Payment and choose an account that the payment will be made from. Add a reference if desired, the date the invoice was paid, and the amount that was paid. If your payment settings are set to pull payments from your accounting application, payments must be added to the accounting application itself. Once completed, the entries generated from this invoice can be synced to your accounting application, and you can also move to receiving stock into your warehouse, which will be covered in another video. That concludes this video on purchase invoices.